and thank you for joining Archbold Biological Station's 5th virtual Discovery Classroom. I'm your moderator, Megan Selva, the Jill Abrahamson Environmental Education Intern. At this time, we cannot walk the trail together, but in Archbold Discovery Classroom, we can still enjoy outdoor learning. Today, Dustin will be streaming live outside in the field to give us a fun and interactive talk about a rare and endangered habitat within the scrub called a Rosemary Bald. We also have a special guest, is Seth Raynor, who is our plant ecology intern with the Plant Ecology Lab. He primarily focuses on lichen, their diversity, and how they interact with fire at Archbold Biological Station. He will be answering poll questions later and talking about the wonderful world of lichens. If you have any additional questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. We would love to see where everyone's from and who everyone is, so if you could put your name and city or state in the chat so that everyone can see who's participating in today's webinar, that'd be great. So let's turn it over to Dustin and learn about this rare and important habitat, and let's see if there's still scrub jays out there. Hey, Dustin.
Hey, Megan. Welcome back, everybody, to another Discovery Classroom. I am excited to be out in this spot because I'm in a special type of Florida scrub that you just don't see on our public nature trail. Sometimes when we have visitors here, oh, I'm backwards, aren't I? Hold on. You just switch. There I didn't realize. So I'm out here in a beautiful part of the scrub, an area that visitors don't normally get to see. It's called a Rosemary Bald or rosemary scrub. And I hadn't planned this out, but I actually have a family of scrub jays that just flew in right here. I've been here for about 20 minutes and they're just hanging out with me. So I am going to switch my camera back. And right in front of me to the left is a scrub jay perched on this oak. I can't zoom in too far because I'm just using my cell phone here. But I'll get a little bit closer. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit here too. If you can see the scrub jay, please type it in. I know that we have people from all over the country that sign on for these classes. So if you've never heard of a Florida scrub jay before, yes, they do look a little bit like a blue jay. They're related to blue jays, but the Florida scrub jay is only found in the Florida scrub, only in Florida. They're actually a federally protected species, and Archbold has been studying them for over 50 years, which is pretty darn amazing. I'm going to just back off of this bird a little bit, and we might get lucky. They might just stick around this whole time. The name of this class is Rosemary Bald, and that's kind of a strange name for a habitat. But take a look here. Why do you think it's called a Rosemary Bald? How did it get its name? This is a type of Florida scrub. I think it's the prettiest type of Florida scrub. Zeke is saying it's very flat, mostly sand. How did it get its name? Yeah, it's mostly a lot of sand out here, right? You might have heard of Bald Mountain, terms like that, areas that don't have a lot of vegetation on them. And that's how this got its name too. The Rosemary Balds are on the higher parts of the Florida scrub, and they have a lot of big sandy patches. There's a reason they have sandy patches. We're gonna go into it in a little bit after we go through our first poll question. But I want you to notice how open it is. Normally when you walk through the Florida scrub, you are, pushing through all these saw palmettos, pushing through all these oak trees. And out here, you actually have a little space to breathe, which is pretty nice. That's why it looks so pretty too. the Florida scrub is an endangered ecosystem. There's only about 15% of the scrub left. And this, the rosemary scrub, is only a portion of that 15%. The rosemary species that's here, which we're seeing a lot of them around me here, they're found in some other states in the Southeast, but the habitat that they create here is only in Florida. So this is a pretty special place to be in. And these sandy spots here are filled with tiny little plants, and I have to confess that I can't identify them all here. On a normal scrub trail, I'm pretty good. But when I'm out here, I see all these little tiny things, and I say, I don't know.
See, we might have lost Dustin. See if he comes back. Oh, he froze. Okay, so we'll just move on to our first poll question until Dustin comes back. All right, first poll question. What is a lichen? Is it a vascular plant, a moss, a fungus, or a composite, which means multiple organisms? And Seth's here with us. He's going to help answer this. Looks like a lot of you got it right. Seth, can you go through the answers and tell us a little bit about lichen?
Yeah, for sure. Hey, everybody. Could you pull up that first slide for me?
Sure.
Like most of y'all said, lichens are composite organisms. They're made up of multiple species. It's usually a single fungal species and a single green algae growing together, but scientists have found multiple variations of this, but it usually all centers around a fungal species. Something to know about lichen to look at their life histories is that they're very slow growing. These slow growing species are very affected by not only management, but any type of disturbance at all. And these multiple life history strategies include multiple types of substrate. These lichens can grow on rocks, they can grow on trees. In the bottom left corner, you can see a couple cladonia that are free living species that don't have a substrate at all. So they're definitely very fascinating organisms. While Dustin is still gone, Megan, do you want to go through more questions, or should we show them specimens?
Sure, if you want to show them some lichen so that they can see what it looks like. And
right, for sure.
I'll stop sharing this so it can go on your screen. All right. And thanks for getting on today. I know it's really hot outside, so Dustin's phone probably overheated. But that's just
for sure.
something we're trying to work on.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's see if we can get it.
Nice, you got a lot of lichen there.
Yeah, seeing if we can get it to focus. So all of these species are actually of the same genus. They're all cladonia. Some of the most recognizable lichen that you'll see in the scrub. Definitely fan favorites of many people. There's lots of diversity. You'll see diversity in color. You'll see diversity in form.
Even like texture, right?
Right. So some of them are branched much more frequently than others. Some of them are topped with reproductive structures like this one.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
And then others grow together pretty. Let's see if we can get it to focus. If we can get it to focus, but you can see there's multiple growths growing along this one twig, and you have different forms that we'll talk about later with different of the some of the other questions.
That's awesome. It looks like Dustin's back.
Nice.
Thanks, Seth. I was just about to get down on the ground and show you some lichen out here. There is lichen out here in the rosemary scrub. It's 91, 92 degrees, something like that out here. So my phone overheated there a little bit. I have wrapped it. I'm holding up an ice pack. Hopefully I won't get cut off for a little while. Now, I found something else that's pretty cool out here. Some of you who have logged on to these classes before have heard me talking about gopher tortoises. I have got a gorgeous burrow, a gorgeous gopher tortoise burrow right behind me. And this is an active one, a nice big adult. So let me take my ice pack off here. We're going to come right up to the side of this burrow. And look at this. This is a nice big burrow right here. I haven't seen the occupant around, but when I was coming in here, the road in and out right here, I see tortoises over here all the time. There's a whole bunch of tortoise burrows, big ones like this and small burrows. This, I think, is prime real estate because right outside this burrow is a couple of things. We've got some prickly pear cactus, which have a tasty fruit. But in front of me here is a whole field of gopher apples. So here, I'll get down so you can see all these gopher apples. All of these short plants around me, these are all gopher apples. And that tortoise right there, that big tortoise, it's got its own farm right here, basically. And what I love about gopher apples is, you know, these are edible. They're pretty tasty. I like eating them. What I think is cool about them is that they are clonal reproducers. So all of these plants we see right here are probably actually just one plant making up this whole carpet of gopher apples. They are in flower right now. There's no fruits on them. There are honeybees everywhere out here. I mean, I've just seen honeybees all over the place. All right, after this, I want to go over and show you some rosemary. But before I do that, let's go back to Seth because we've got another poll question for you. And I'm going to cover my phone up here with my ice pack again. So let's do our next poll question.
All right, next poll question is, how many lichen species do you think are at Archbold? More than 100, 80 to 99, 60 to 79, or 40 to 59? It's a hard question. All right, I'll give you a couple more seconds. And it looks like there's different percentages of answers here, Seth. So
yeah, it's definitely a tough question. Kind of just wanted to ask it to show how awesome of a place Archbold is, but it is more than 100 species. In the 80s, there was thought to only be close, but after multiple decades of different researchers coming and collecting lichens, we now know that there is well over 100 species, and we're working every day towards getting a more precise number at what that is. Like I was showing earlier, there's plenty of diversity when it comes to lichens. There's a diversity in color and form, as you can see on the screen. These form names seem complicated, but they're really pretty simple. Fruticose just means like three-dimensional. It's not flat. Foliose and crustose are just flat growth forms. The only difference is with foliose, you can get to the underside, like almost like a leaf, whereas the crust, it's too adnate to the surface. Just some other diversity numbers for you. There's more than 3,600 North American species of lichen, and then global diversity has different estimates between 15,000 and 18,000. Also, Dustin, I really like your ice pack phone idea. I'm glad it's working for you.
Thank you, Seth. Hopefully it'll keep working. I got a little distracted when Seth was talking because I just had another bird encounter, and this bird has flown off, but I want to tell you what just happened out here. It's springtime and birds are breeding, so I'm seeing a lot of birds. Some of them are mad at me. I had a mockingbird that was just screeching at me for like 20 minutes. But what just happened was a nighthawk. A nighthawk, and I wish I could show it to you, but nighthawks, they make their nest right on the ground. In fact, they don't even have a nest. They just lay their eggs right on the ground, and they have to figure out a way to protect that nest. So I didn't find the nest, but as I was walking over here, I saw what looked like an injured bird. So this is one of the parents, and it was leading me off, pretending it was injured. It would fly off about maybe 15 feet, something like that, and would kind of be like flopping around. And so I would walk toward it, and it would fly again a little further away. And it did that about 3 times, and then it took off and just flew off. So it was not injured. It was totally fine, but it was trying to lead me away from its nest, which must be somewhere near here.
Yeah, Emily says, watch where you walk, Dustin.
I know. I've seen their nest before, and literally it's just little camouflage eggs sitting on the white sand. So I'm gonna walk in the opposite direction that I saw the bird the first time. I really want to just kind of geek out a little bit about the rosemary, the Florida rosemary plant, because that is what is making this whole habitat possible. And it is pretty cool. So I just want to tell you some interesting facts about rosemary. Well, one is it smells fantastic. I wish that you could smell this with me, because this whole area out here smells so good, particularly on hot days. The rosemary habitat smells amazing. This is not related to the rosemary that you eat. It's not related to that. It looks a lot like it. Not related. Another thing that's interesting is that when you see a plant like this plant is either a male or a female. They have tiny little flowers, so you've got to get up real close. I don't see any flowers on this one. I'm not sure when they have their flowers on them. And you got to really know what you're doing to tell apart the males and the females. The other thing about them is the reason there's all these white patches here is because of chemical warfare. Their tiny little leaves and their roots have chemicals in it that fight off the other plants. So when you look around, you might think, well, what's going on? How come there aren't a lot of other plants in here? There's so much sand. It is chemical warfare going on. That's also why we have rare plants in this area, because they're the ones that adapted and they learned to live in the soil with those chemicals, which is just pretty darn neat. Fire is another huge thing in the Florida scrub. So you might be wondering what the relationship is with fire with these. It's totally different than the relationship to fire from all the oak trees we're used to in the Florida scrub. Oak trees, the fire comes through, it looks like it kills them, but most of the oak is actually living underground and it pops right back up. These are totally different. The Florida rosemary have a very shallow root system. When the fire comes through, poof, they are dead. They are gone. But here's the thing. Without fire, this species wouldn't be here. The scrub is a complicated place. This species needs fire to open up these areas for them to get established, but at the same time, it does kill them. So they have to grow back from seeds. Pretty amazing, right? Okay, let's go to our next question.
All right, speaking of fire, how do lichens react to fire? Lichen love fire just like many other scrub species. Lichen are negatively impacted by fire severely, taking a long time to recover. Lichen are impacted by the fire but can recover quickly. Ooh, it's in
Hard
between.
question.
It's in between the second and the third.
That's what the
Answer.
answers are so far?
Yeah. So I'm gonna hand it over to you, Seth.
All right. That was definitely a tough question, but it kind of goes back off of what we talked about earlier. They are slow growing species, so when they are affected by something, it's going to take them a long time to rebound. They face this weird dichotomy with fire where they really love the openness of the scrub habitat, and they definitely take advantage of it, especially these species that you can see in the bottom left corner. Actually, all the lichen you can see on here, all of them are vagrant lichen. They do not attach to a surface, so they can be wind blown through the scrub and can be moved around and grow new populations in different areas. So they definitely like the openness, but they have such a high mortality to fire that it definitely combats it. And the best way to like manage for this is just to maintain long unburned patches. And Archbold has done a great job of maintaining a mosaic of biodiverse landscape.
Awesome. Thank you, Seth. There you are. Hey, everybody. Man, the lichens are so cool. The one thing that we're not seeing out here today are the pink lichens, too, because you only get those in the shady areas. They grow on trees. It is not shady out here, I can tell you that. We've got a lot of sun. One thing that you'll notice about plants that live in the scrub is that their leaves usually are pretty small. So all the Florida Rosemary leaves are teeny, teeny, tiny. Here's a really cool one. This is a tree that is only found on the Lake Wales Ridge. This is called Quercus inapina. Quercus inapina, a lot of people call it scrub oak or Archbold oak because it was at Archbold where the researchers showed it was its own species. And we can see these little leaves are curled up, pointing right up. It looks like someone took a blow dryer and just blew the leaves right up in the air. When the sun is at its highest, these have changed their angle and made themselves smaller towards the sun. So that is a good strategy in the scrub. I want to show you one other plant here that is easily confused. It's easily confused with a lichen. And it's all over the place on the ground out here. Not a lichen. Come down on the ground here. This stuff right here. Does anybody know what this is?
Zeke guessed that it's a moss.
A moss? Oh, very good, very good.
Sand spike moss, says Bill.
Bill! Nice. Is that Bill Parkin?
No, his name's Bill Smith.
Yeah, Bill Smith, okay. Yeah, sand spike moss. It's actually not a moss, but it's called a moss. And you see a lot of this in the scrub. It's a primitive type of plant. What I think is cool about this is when you're looking around at plants, they have a whole history. And if you could go in your time machine back hundreds of millions of years to the Carboniferous age, the trees that were around there were very closely related to the spike moss. Those trees are all long extinct now, and all that's left of those types of plants are all little small plants now, like the little spike moss here, which is doing just fine in the scrub. There's lots of spike moss out here in the scrub. Well, I think that's about all I'm going to show you today, but we do have plenty of time for questions and answers. So hopefully you've been getting your questions. If you're on Zoom, put your questions in the Q&A section there, and we'll go through, and Seth and I and Megan will answer as many as we can.
Right now we have
Yeah.
So far we have 6 questions. Oh, Zeke was asking, this is a question for Seth. Zeke was asking, what is Caledonia?
So Cladonia.
Cladonia, sorry.
Yeah. I see what he meant. It's just a group. It's a genus of lichen, and a genus is just like a taxonomic group of species that are all closely related.
Cool, thank you. John Corzine asks, are lichen useful to humans?
Some have been. I know people make like tinctures out of some of them for health purposes. And some of them are nitrogen fixers, which are important for the environment.
Right. Let's see, another question. Pam asks, do gopher tortoises eat sand spike moss? Or maybe what animals, if not gopher tortoises, what sort of animals eat the lichen?
Sand spike moss? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe Dustin would know that one.
Yeah, maybe someone in the chat might know.
But somebody else does, Pam does ask, what eats lichen? You know any?
So lichen is a very nutrient poor substance. So even in places where it's super abundant, it's usually eaten more as a survival food. Eric, yeah.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Good thing, yeah, we'll have to research that one, huh? So Heather Sellers asks, are lichens endangered?
There's some that are endangered. There's only 2 federally listed species, including one that we have here, Cladonia perforata. The other is a rock gnome lichen that grows up in North Carolina and Tennessee.
Very cool.
Yeah, I see people are saying that reindeer, elk, and moose eat it in the winter months. That's right. It's just their survival food. They prefer berries and new growth twigs, of course, but.
All right, Ginger asks, is the Florida rosemary edible? Like the rosemary bald that Dustin was showing.
I'm not.
I don't
think so.
I don't think so either. I asked Dustin this earlier, and he said that it's not like the rosemary that you buy at the store.
Right.
And it's not edible, right, Eric?
That's correct, yeah. Although it is eaten by various insects, but not by humans.
So people don't make like tea out of it like they do the sand pine?
Never heard about that.
Okay.
Back.
Hi, Dustin.
I was just reading yesterday about, I don't remember the name of it, but there's an insect that's been found on these, that's been found nowhere else except for, I believe it was the male flowers. Remember, some of the plants are male, some of them are female. There's an insect that lives only on, I think it was the male flowers. And they do have, just like people, if you went out here and you counted all the males and all the females, it'd be just about even, except for there'd be a little bit more females than males. I'm not sure what questions we already went over, but do we have any more?
We have a lot of questions, and we also have Dr. Eric Menges, who is joining us to answer some of these hard questions.
Oh, yes.
Bill Smith asks, some arboreal lichens phosphorus under UV at night.
Yep.
Have the lichens in the rosemary bald been tested?
Yep. Multiple of them have. Something I do when I find a species is doing chemical testing on it, and the easiest way to look for chemicals is just putting it under a UV light and seeing if it reacts.
Thank you. Susan Coulterman, and Dustin, maybe you would know this answer, or Dr. Ekmenges. She wants to know if the rosemary, if it's poisonous or if it just doesn't taste good.
We have a lot of people wanting to eat the rosemary. Eric, have you ever tried it? Did it make you throw up? I don't know.
No, I've never tried it. It doesn't seem very appetizing to me. But I don't. We need to get somebody to try it. Maybe Susan can come up and try it.
Let's
All right,
see.
next question.
Rebecca Doyle Morin asks, are rosemary seeds resistant to fire unlike the plants, or do they have to disperse in after the fire?
Oh, that's a good one. Eric, why don't you take that?
Yeah, the seeds have a persistent dormancy in the soil, so they can live probably for decades in the soil. The soil does not conduct heat very well when it's dry, so the seeds are safe in there. And when after the fire, when the rain has washed away some of the chemicals in the soil that the Florida rosemary plants produce, the seeds are able to germinate and produce a lot of new seedlings for the next generation.
Cool.
I'll just add one little bit to that, which is that Eric's team, when he's talking about fire and how hot things are, he knows, because they actually come out and they put special thermometers just under the sand, and they're actually measuring the heat when the fires come through. Another thing that I think is interesting about those seeds is, if there's anybody here that's done any plant propagation, some seeds you need to scarify, like scratch them up a little bit, and these are seeds that need that. It could just be from wind blowing sand against them and that kind of thing. What else do we got, Megan?
See, this is from an anonymous attendee. They want to know what kinds of organisms make up lichen, are part of the mutualism.
It's a good question, and kind of a tricky one. So a lot of lichen are made up of just a primary fungal partner and one algal partner, which is just like an algae species of some sort. Others, instead of the algae species, have a cyanobacteria. Some have both at the same time. And then some have also been found to have a yeast, which acts as a structural glue. So there's been 4 main primary components that have been found. And then people have also been doing studies on the bacterial community that's found, just like we have within us, and the viruses that attack them. That being said, even though those are 4 primary partners, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's mutualism. A lot of lichen studies today have shown that the primary fungal partner is probably the only one who's benefiting from the relationship.
That's right. You were saying that it's like a coral reef of the land, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And
Sort of.
even though the algae do have like a structure to live in, they can live by themselves without the fungus, but like that fungus can't grow without that algal partner giving them energy.
Awesome. Let's see here. Paul Rubin asks, do rosemary balds burn as frequently as other scrub habitat?
Well, Paul Rubin definitely knows the answer to that one. That's Megan's husband, and he flies drones over the fires. I was mentioning that they do need fire, even though the fire kills them. You can see how open it is here. You can imagine that it's not always easy to get a fire through here because there's a lot of sand. What we think is about 20 to 59 years, somewhere in there, is the natural fire return interval for this type of habitat. At Archbold, we burn more frequently than that, and for 2 reasons. One is that these rosemary pieces are inside of other habitats of scrub around them, which like to burn about every 10 years. The other reason is that Archbold has a patchy burn philosophy. What that means is that whenever we're doing a fire here, we don't burn down every single shrub, every single tree. It's patchy. So say you've got an area here that the rosemary really likes to have at least 20 years, something like that. Otherwise it starts reducing in size. The area, the bulb will start to get smaller if it's less than about 20 years. But if we do it every 10 years, not all of it will burn. There'll be parts of it that don't burn. And then when we come back again another 10 years, then you've hit that 20-year mark. So patchiness is really important. Some of the plants that are in the rosemary area, they don't want 20 years, they want 10. So that's our philosophy on it. Eric, I mean, it would be great to, do you have anything to add to that?
That was a great explanation, Dustin. And it's true that if you have a landscape where some areas burn more frequently and some areas burn less frequently, and some areas burn hotter and some areas burn not as hot, you're going to be able to have a better mixture of species. So that's kind of our philosophy with the Florida rosemary scrub. We have had times when we had complete fires across Florida rosemary stands frequently, like within twice in a row in 5 years, and that will eliminate the Florida rosemary because it takes longer than 5 years for the plants to produce seeds and replenish the seeds in that seed bank.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see here. Another question is from Alan, and he asks, is there a special lichen that's only found on the ridge?
Like, I guess only Lake Wells Ridge?
Right.
Hmm.
You know of any?
I do not, because even the endangered species we have here has a pretty disjunct population throughout Florida.
You're right, right.
I'm trying to think if there's any that come to mind. I don't think so. I think they're pretty widespread in their distribution.
Okay. Sabine asks, how does lichen obtain different colors?
So different species have very specific chemical compounds within them. They're secondary metabolites, which is just a fancy word for like an acid that they produce within them. And it's these lichen acids that give them their colors. And it's the same thing we use when we do chemical tests to see what kind of species there actually are.
Interesting. Let's see here. I think Dustin or Dr. Eric would know this question, and maybe Seth. What chemicals are produced by rosemary that harm other plants?
Well, the main chemical that's produced is called cerathiolin, and it's a chemical that was discovered from Florida rosemary when people started analyzing how it affected other plants through the chemicals. That chemical is broken down into hydrocinamic acid in the leaf litter and the soil. And both of those are strong allelopathic chemicals that inhibit germination and growth of most of the species that they tested against.
And a follow-up question for that one is, are animals put off, and this is by Heather Sellers, are animals put off by the poison in rosemary or just to other plants that would compete?
I think those chemicals in rosemary deter most animals. There are some specialized insects that are able to detoxify those chemicals and then feed on Florida rosemary foliage. I think there's a moth, and there's another insect too. I can't remember the name right now.
Cool. This is a pretty good question by Pam. How does lichen spread from one ridge to another? Or rather, how does lichen spread?
So that is a really good question. There's multiple ways that lichen can spread throughout the landscape. It can do it vegetatively. the vagrant lichen I was talking about before can be wind dispersed through an ecosystem and end up in different areas. But also their sexual reproductive system is designed to distribute far and wide. Their reproductive structures send out fungal spores into the air, and they're wind dispersed over large areas of land, and they'll land on the ground, and large distribution throughout the world of their photosynthetic partners, which would be that unicellular algae or a cyanobacteria of some kind. And when that fungal spore lands on it, a new lichen will grow there.
Great explanation. Rachel Moore asks, what's your favorite lichen?
Oh, that is a hard question.
I think they're all very awesome.
Yeah, I think they're super awesome. It's super hard to pick one because they're all really great. It's hard not to pick one of the Cladonia because I study it the most. Probably the one I really like is this one. I don't know if it'll focus on it, but
Yeah, we see it all right.
it's a Cladonia pachycladoides. I don't know its common name. That's my bad. But it honestly looks like if lichen was a weeping willow. It's very like hanging down and distraught looking.
Nice. I really like Christmas lichen.
That's a good one. Yeah, I definitely had to include that on the slides. It's
Mhm.
very colorful.
Let's see here. Man, lots of questions. This is great. Mary Lou Clocken-Kemper asks, what plants can grow near the rosemary?
Well, one of the plants that seems to grow well near Florida Rosemary is scrub blazing star. So sometimes you see scrub blazing star coming up through the rosemary foliage. And we did some experiments looking at how rosemary foliage affected germination of a whole series of plants, and the scrub blazing star was not very much affected by being doused with water that had rosemary chemicals in it. So whereas some of the other rare species that are found in those open gaps won't grow near Florida rosemary, and their germination is suppressed by those chemicals. So different species have different tolerances to the rosemary chemicals.
Awesome. This is another great question from Ashley Kiesling. Excuse me. I see lichens on dead trees a lot. Do they kill trees, or do they just colonize the trees after they die?
That's a good question. They don't kill trees. Some do colonize trees after they die. Different species have different substrates they prefer. So if they prefer living bark, then a dead tree probably wouldn't be found with that lichen. But there's plenty of lichen that do prefer decomposing matter, dead trees, snags, and that type of habitat to grow on.
I've even heard that if you see lichen on oak trees in an oak forest, it means it's pretty healthy. Is that true?
It means it's been there for a while. So going back to kind of a theme we've been talking about, there's slow growth. As time progresses, more and more lichen would grow on that oak tree. So if age is a function of health, then maybe.
Another way lichens have been used that way are indicators of air quality. So in the upper Midwest, you find lichens that have been eliminated from areas that have air pollution, acid rain, ozone pollution. So they're used as indicators of air quality, some lichens anyway, that are sensitive to that.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, I like this question. Allie and family ask, what is the smallest lichen you have, and what's the biggest?
That is a really good one. That's hard. Smallest, I would probably have to say, maybe, see, it's like function. Are we talking about the entire thallus? Or are we talking about when you look at it, like the smallest structures? And that's kind of what I'm thinking. So I'd probably go with something like gold dust lichen. The genus is Chrysothrix. It's just a dust species. When you look at it under a microscope, it looks very fine. Let's see if it'll come up. If y'all see that like bright yellow green right there, that's it.
Oh, okay.
But it's just very small dust particles, it looks like, but it's a lichen. Largest would probably be either one of the big foliose ones, like this Parmatrima, one of the big fluffy cladonias, either oak toes, Cladonia evansii, or the reindeer, Dixie reindeer lichen, or whatever Cladonia subtenuous is called.
Awesome. So I think we only have time for one more question. So this question is from Leanne Plumhoff. How can I tell how old a rosemary is? By the size of it, I've heard they can be hundreds of years old.
Well, you can estimate the age of a Florida rosemary by counting the internodes. The internodes is a space between one branch and another branch. And that will give you a rough estimate of how old the Florida rosemary is. It's not perfect. Sometimes you get more than one internode in a year, and more often you get years where there's not branching on part of the rosemary plant. But that'll give you a general idea. I have not seen Florida rosemary plants that are hundreds of years old, but certainly they live to be 50 and 60 years old, and maybe they live to be hundreds, but I have not seen that.
All right, great. And I guess Dustin, his phone overheated and wasn't able to get back on. So thank you, everyone. To everyone tuning in, you can check out our website at www.archbold-station.org for more resources and the schedule of Archbold's Discovery Classroom and scientific seminars. We have one coming up this Thursday. It's actually my intern project, and as well as Juan Olivares, who's an intern at Buck Island Ranch. We hope to see you at those future events. A huge thank you to all our participants for your amazing questions. Sorry if we didn't get to everybody. Thank you for being so patient, and we'd love to hear your suggestions in our short online survey. A huge shout out to Dustin for going out to explore the scrub, and Seth for sharing his experience and knowledge with us, as well as Dr. Eric Menges. Thank you so much for joining us and helping answer those tough questions. We are signing out and hope to see you all next Tuesday. Stay safe.